The wind had a strange song that evening, low and restless, carrying the scent of rain and dust over the small town of Dry Creek. The old saloon sign creaked with every gust, swinging on its single chain like it might finally give up and crash to the ground. From inside, laughter spilled into the night, rough, drunken, the kind that had no warmth in it. Then the door swung open, and out stepped a thin, nervous cowboy clutching a folded paper like it was the only thing keeping him alive. His name was Eli Turner, and the paper in his hand was a marriage certificate. Eli wasn't the kind of man anyone in Dry Creek noticed much. He was quiet, polite, always kept his hat low and his words few. The sort of man who fixed fences, fed cattle, and went home alone every night. But that morning, something had changed. The sheriff had ridden into town hollering about a new, settlers program, a way for men to find wives out on the frontier. $5, he'd shouted from the courthouse steps. $5 and you get a good, honest woman who'll help you build a life. No guarantees, no refunds. The crowd had laughed, but Eli hadn't. Maybe it was the loneliness that made his hands shake as he reached into his pocket. Maybe it was the idea of waking up one more morning to an empty chair, an empty plate, and silence so heavy it made his chest hurt. So he handed over the money. He thought it would be nothing, just a name on a list, a forgotten hope. But the sheriff had tipped his hat and said, "You got lucky, son. She's a strong one, comes from Apache country, big woman, real big, you'll see." By afternoon, the whole town was buzzing. "The giant woman's comin'," they said, half mocking, half curious. When the wagon finally rolled in from the southern road, folks gathered like it was a show. The air went still as the canvas flap opened and a shadow moved inside. Then she stepped down. She was taller than every man there, her shoulders broad and straight, her face proud but calm. Her skin glowed bronze under the sinking sun, her black hair falling in thick braids down her back. She wore a pale ceremonial dress trimmed with turquoise beads that shimmered as she moved. Her eyes, dark as a moonless night, looked over the crowd, unreadable. Someone muttered, "Lord Almighty, she's bigger than my horse." A snicker followed, but she didn't flinch. She just stood there, the faintest breeze lifting the ends of her hair. The sheriff gestured toward Eli, who was trying not to look like he might bolt. "There's your husband," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Eli stepped forward, heart thumping. "Ma'am," he said quietly, tipping his hat. "I reckon you traveled a long way. Hope you ain't too disappointed." She studied him. Her gaze wasn't cruel or mocking, just steady. "You are the one who paid?" she asked softly, her voice deep and smooth like river stones. "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice trembling a little. "Though I didn't rightly know what I was paying for." A few men in the crowd laughed, but her eyes never left his. "You are honest," she said simply. "That is rare." The preacher cleared his throat, and within minutes they stood beneath the wide desert sky, the ceremony short and plain. She said her vows clearly, while Eli stumbled through his like a schoolboy reading from a script. When it was done, she didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded once. "It is done," she said. As the crowd began to drift off, whispering, Eli held out his hand. "My ranch is about an hour's ride north. Ain't much, but it's home." She looked at his hand for a moment, then took it carefully, like she was afraid she might break it. Her grip was strong, so strong he almost winced, but it wasn't cruel. "I will follow," she said. The ride was quiet. The desert, stretched around them in golden red, the sun sinking behind the mesas like a slow fire. Eli wanted to speak, but every word that came to mind felt small, foolish. He glanced at her once, saw her silhouette against the sky, and felt that strange ache again, something between awe and fear. When they reached his ranch, dusk had settled. The cabin was small, made from old pine logs with a sagging roof and a porch that leaned like it was tired. The corral fence was half broken, and the barn door hung crooked on one hinge. She looked around without a word. "This is where you live?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am, ain't much to look at, I know. But it keeps the rain off." She nodded once. "It is small, but it is peaceful." He helped her down from the horse, his hand trembling again when her fingers brushed his. Inside, he lit a fire, the flames throwing soft light over her face. She moved carefully, as though everything might shatter under her touch. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," he said after a while, unable to bear the silence. "You can ride back to town come morning. I won't stop you." She turned to him, eyes calm but searching. "In my tribe, Words once spoken cannot be taken back. You asked, I accepted. That is binding. I didn't mean to. She raised her hand, stopping him. You are afraid. He looked down. Maybe a little. I ain't never been married before. And you, well, you ain't like anyone I've ever met. Her expression softened. You tremble like a colt. But your heart is steady. He smiled faintly. You can tell that just by looking. I can feel it, she said, placing her hand near his chest but not touching. It is clean, stronger than you think. For a long while, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly. Outside, coyotes called in the distance. Finally, she said, my name is Naima. It means, gentle storm. That suits you, Eli said quietly. You look like one. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. You think I am dangerous. I think, he said after a pause, you could be. But I also think you wouldn't hurt no one who didn't deserve it. Her eyes softened then, and for a heartbeat, she looked almost shy. She turned her face toward the flames, the light dancing in her dark hair. I will help you fix your fences tomorrow, she said. And feed your horses. I am not made to sit still. You don't have to work, he replied quickly. You're my, he hesitated on the word, wife. It felt heavy, strange. You should rest. I work because it brings peace, she said simply. And you need help. I can see that. Eli chuckled softly. You sure can. They fell quiet again. He poured her some coffee, and she sipped it carefully, watching him over the rim of the tin cup. Then she asked something that made his chest tighten. Do you always eat alone? He nodded. Been that way a long time. Not anymore, she said. He looked up, surprised. She didn't smile, didn't look away. She just said it like it was a fact. And something about the certainty in her voice made the cabin feel less empty. When the fire burned low, he offered her his bed and said he'd take the floor. She didn't argue, only nodded and lay down, her broad shoulders casting long shadows on the wall. Eli lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly over the hills. He thought about how strange life was, how a man could wake up alone and go to sleep married to a woman who seemed carved from the earth itself. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt so much. And as the wind swept through the dry plains outside, he heard it again, that soft, haunting sound. Not the whine this time, but her voice, quiet as a prayer. Sleep, Eli Turner, she murmured in her native tongue. The storm watches over you now. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long, long while, he slept without fear. The morning broke before the sun did, thin light seeping through the cracks in the cabin wall. Eli was half awake, his body heavy with the strange peace of shared silence. Naima was already gone from the bed, her footsteps soft outside. Through the window, he saw her near the corral, the hem of her dress catching the breeze as she moved with quiet purpose. She was feeding the horses, her broad back straight, her hands gentle despite their strength. The sight caught him off guard. He had never seen anyone handle animals like that, no whip, no command, just presence. The horses, usually restless with strangers, stood still under her touch. Eli stepped outside, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You're up early, he said softly. She turned, her hair catching the early light, and nodded. The horses were hungry, so was I, he chuckled. Ain't much for breakfast but beans and bread. I'll cook something up. She followed him back in, and the smell of firewood soon filled the cabin. They ate in silence, though it wasn't the uncomfortable kind anymore. Every now and then, he caught her studying the walls, the floor, the small carved figures on the shelf. It made him wonder what kind of home she'd come from, and what she'd left behind to stand here with him in this lonely stretch of land. After they ate, she walked to the open door and looked toward the mountains in the distance. In my home, when the sun rises like this, she said quietly, we give thanks for another day. We believe each morning is a gift that must be earned again. Eli leaned against the table, watching her silhouette against the dawn. Seems you've earned more days than most. She glanced back at him. Do you always joke when you are afraid? He blinked, caught off guard. I ain't afraid. Her gaze softened. Yes, you are, but not of me. You are afraid of meeting someone. He didn't answer. She was right, and somehow that truth didn't sting as much as he thought it would. By mid-morning, they were working side by side in the corral, mending fences and clearing weeds. Eli tried to lift a fallen beam, grunting with effort, but she stepped forward and lifted it as though it weighed nothing. He laughed breathlessly. You weren't kidding when you said you're strong. She gave a faint smile. Strength is not pride where I come from. It is duty. They worked until the sun sat high. Sweat gleamed on her skin, and when she brushed a strand of hair from her face, Eli caught himself staring a little too long. He looked away quickly, heart pounding. He had never known a woman who carried herself like that, so sure, so unashamed. When the heat grew unbearable, they rested in the shade. She handed him a canteen, and as he drank, she asked softly, "Why do you live alone, Eli Turner?" He thought for a long time before answering. "Guess I always figured I weren't the kind of man anyone would wait for. My folks died young, my brother went east, and this land was all I had left. I stayed 'cause I didn't know where else to go." She nodded slowly, like she understood. "And now," he looked at her, the dry wind lifting dust between them. "Now I reckon I got a reason to stay." Her expression didn't change much, but her eyes, dark and deep as a canyon, softened. "You speak with truth. That is why your words matter, even when they are few." The moment lingered between them, quiet and strange. Then a sound shattered it, the sharp crack of wood splitting. They both turned toward the barn. At first, Eli thought it was the wind again. But then came the low murmur of voices, men's voices, rough. He motioned for her to stay put, but she was already moving, silent as shadow. They crept toward the barn, and through the gap in the planks, Eli saw two figures rummaging through his supplies. He recognized them, the same men who had jeered during the wedding, men who had followed them home. "Looks like the cowboy's got himself a prize," one whispered. "Big as she is, she'd fetch a fortune if we sold her south." The other spat on the ground. "Ain't no man like him deserves a woman like that. We'll take her and leave him for the coyotes." Eli's stomach tightened. He didn't have a plan, didn't even have the nerve to think of one, but something inside him, something raw and defiant, told him to act. He stepped out, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he said, voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. The men froze, then laughed. "You, put that thing down, boy, before you hurt yourself." Naima stepped out beside him then, tall and silent, her face carved in stone. The laughter faltered. One of the men sneered, "You think you can scare us, lady?" Without a word, she took a step forward, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath her bare feet. The first man raised his gun, she was faster. Her hand shot out, grabbing the barrel, twisting it until the metal groaned. He cried out in pain as the weapon bent like a toy. The second man lunged, knife flashing. Eli fired once, missing on purpose to scare him off, but the man kept coming. Naima caught him mid-stride, her arm sweeping across his chest. He hit the ground hard, breath gone. But before she could turn, the first man pulled a second gun from his belt and fired. The bullet ripped through Eli's sleeve, grazing his arm. He staggered back, dropping the rifle. Naima's eyes widened, and a sound came from her throat, half a growl, half a cry. She moved like lightning, striking the man's hand so hard the weapon flew across the dirt. A moment later, he was on his knees, staring up at her in terror. Eli pressed his hand to the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. "I'm all right," he muttered, but his voice was weak. She knelt beside him, her breath trembling. "You bled because of me," she whispered. He shook his head. "I'd do it again. You're my wife now, Naima. That means I stand between you and whatever comes through that door." Her gaze searched his face, and for the first time since they met, her expression broke. "In my home," she said softly, "a man proves his heart not by words, but by wounds. You have done both." She tore a strip from her dress and wrapped it around his arm with careful hands. Her touch was strong, but tender enough to make his chest ache. By the time the men stumbled to their feet and limped away, the desert sky was turning pink with the promise of dawn. The air was cool, clean. Inside the cabin, Naima tended the fire again, her movements slower now, almost hesitant. Eli sat nearby, drowsy from exhaustion, watching her. The glow of the flames painted her face in shades of amber and gold. She spoke after a long silence. "In my tribe, a woman wears a spirit band to protect her heart. She keeps it on until she finds someone worthy of seeing her without it." He frowned slightly. "Like a charm." She shook her head. "No, like a shield. It is not for beauty. It is for trust." Then, slowly, she reached for her neck and unfastened the beaded band that had never left her skin since the moment she arrived. The beads shimmered in the firelight as she laid it gently on the table. "I will take it off," she said softly, voice trembling, "just for tonight." Eli didn't understand all the meaning behind her words, but he felt the weight of them. The gesture wasn't about love or claim, it was surrender, a moment of truth between two souls who had seen too much loneliness. She turned to him, her eyes warm and bright. "You saw me as I am. Not as a prize or a curse. For that, I will not hide." Eli met her gaze, his throat tight. "And you saw me when no one else ever did." Outside, the wind quieted. The first light of morning spilled across the land, soft and golden. Two broken men limped away into the horizon, their figures shrinking until they were nothing but specks against the rising sun. Inside that small cabin, a giant woman and a shy cowboy sat side by side in silence, not needing words. The fire crackled low, and for the first time since either could remember, the air was full of peace. Naima looked toward the window and whispered something in her native tongue, a prayer carried on her breath. Eli didn't understand it, but he felt it, the kind of promise no paper or preacher could bind. And as the sun finally rose over Dry Creek, it found them there, two souls who had risked their hearts in a world that didn't believe in mercy, and for once, the light didn't seem so far away.